My name is Anthony, and I am a heroin addict. I have been for the past several years. My story isn't about my life of depravity and drug use throughout. It is about a facility called Harmony Hills. I'm not great at conveying things, but if I can save one soul from that wretched place, then I will consider my mission accomplished. I was 25 years old, and my life had completely fallen apart. I had no more job, no more girlfriend, and I was constantly on the brink of suicide. One day, after one of my multiple daily injections, I decided that I had to get better. Most people probably don't know this, but sometimes when addicts get high, they make these extravagant promises to themselves that they will never use drugs again. They're typically always wrong. I scoured the internet for rehab facilities near me. I found a couple of promising options and was ready to call them when I checked my email. Strangely enough, I had a message from a lady named Julie from a rehab called Harmony Hills. I hadn't told anyone about my recent drug use, so I'm not sure how anyone could have known to email me. I didn't think about it too much, though it could have been my parents' doing. My mother always seems to know when I was struggling, like some parental sixth sense. I opened the email, and this is what it contained. Hello, Anthony. Are you sick and tired of your life of desperation? Are you ready for real change? Come to Harmony Hills, and we will help you become the person you were meant to be. We are a new recovery program, and we are ready to help you, free of charge. There was a phone number at the bottom. This almost seemed like it was too good to be true, and the email was kind of vague. I wasn't able to come up with any information on this Harmony Hills. There was no website, and really no information about it at all online. I had never heard of a program that was free of charge. But after another shot of dope, a familiar wave of peace came over me, and I decided to call the number. After one ring, a young lady answered. Hello, Harmony Hill Admissions, where we strive to create a better you. This is Mary speaking. Her voice sounded young and peppy. Hi, my name's Tony, and I was just calling about your program, and I kinda had some questions. The conversation went on for about 30 minutes, and I asked her all sorts of questions about the program and how in the world it could be free. She explained to me that there was apparently some billionaire who struggled with the same problems I did, and just wanted to help people. The program was 90 days, and she guaranteed me that by the end I would be a new person. Looking back on it, she was strangely pushy about it in a very subtle way. It's hard to explain, and she wouldn't really let me take no for an answer. But I was really too high at the time to notice. Her voice was comforting and reassuring, and she said all the right things. By the time the phone call ended, I had a scheduled transport ready to pick me up from my apartment in 3 days. 3 more days to get messed up, I thought. My family and I weren't exactly on speaking terms at the time, so I just sent them a quick text message telling them about this program I was going to, and I promised them I would get better. Though I had made that promise many times before, this genuinely felt different. Day 3 came, and I woke up to do my morning shot of dope to get myself out of bed. I checked my phone, and it was already 1 p.m. A surge of uncertainty came through me. Could I really do this? I really didn't want to have to go through withdrawal again. My ride was scheduled to get there at 2:30 p.m., and I heavily considered calling them to explain that I couldn't go through with it. It was too late, I thought. They're probably already on their way to get me. I nodded off for a while, and at 2:15, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 large men dressed in white t-shirts and black jeans. They both towered above me at over 6 feet tall. One of the men was bald with a bushy beard, and the other had long, dirty blonde hair. Hello. We are your ride to Harmony Hills. Great. I guess I had to go now. They both had this wide grin plastered to their face. They looked super fake. And their eyes. Something was empty in their eyes. "Hey, guys, yeah, I gotta do one thing." I stumbled into the bathroom to do one last shot of dope. I guess this is it, I thought to myself. After about 10 minutes, I wandered out of the bathroom, ready to go. Strangely, the two men looked like they hadn't moved an inch. They were still standing in front of my door with that creepy grin attached to their face. The car ride was long and boring. The two men hardly said a word, and we had been driving for hours. They hardly seemed to have any personality at all, and they never even mentioned their names. We made our way to a rest stop at a fast food restaurant. "This is our last stop before we get up to the mountains. There won't be any phone service or rest stops. Can I get you anything?" The large man with dirty blonde hair asked. Sure, I guess. I'll just take a large Coke." I didn't really have an appetite. "Perfect," he said, grinning as he exited the car and headed towards the building. He was in there about 5 or 10 minutes, and after a short, awkward silence, the one with the beard spoke. "I know you might be getting nervous, but Harmony Hills is an amazing place. You are really going to love it there. I did my 90 days, and it's the only place where I was able to make real change to myself. The only problem is the lack of women." He let out a forced laugh. Thanks, man. Yeah, I hope I can make it work this time," I stammered. Another couple of minutes went by, and the man came back with my Coke and a bag full of burgers and fries. "In case you get hungry," he smiled at me. Thank you. You really didn't have to do that," I replied, and he handed me my Coke. I took a long sip, and after a couple of minutes, I started getting dreary and felt my eyes start to close. When I woke up, we were in a huge tunnel that I had never seen before. "Where are we?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. "We are up in the mountains now, my friend," the bearded one said with that sickly smile. The weird thing about the tunnel is that I didn't see a single other car the entire time we were in it, and the fact that we were in there for a full 30 minutes. I found it odd that I didn't even know that this giant tunnel existed at all. I peered out the window and found myself in a trance-like state, staring at the walls of the tunnel. It was so dark and pitch black. I imagined images of serpent-like creatures dancing on the wall and found myself drifting off again. This time, when I opened my eyes, I was greeted by bright sunshine and sprawling mountain forests. As we crept up the road, I saw a huge, white, hotel-like building in a clearing. If you've ever seen The Shining, it was not unlike that building, very large with a beautiful property. "Here we are," the bearded man said. We pulled into a small parking area at a smaller building that was adjacent to the big one. "This is the detox center. You'll be spending about a week here depending on your symptoms." I was starting to get the very initial feeling of withdrawal, a runny nose, depression. How long had we been driving for? I wondered. Withdrawal symptoms typically shouldn't start this soon. I thanked the men for driving me and headed into the smaller building. Greeting me was a middle-aged woman with curly hair, glasses, and that same unnatural grin on her face. I sat down and did an intake process with her that lasted about 20 minutes. They had me sign tons of paperwork that I didn't even have time to skim through while she spoke. She explained to me that my detox would last about 5 to 7 days, and then I would proceed to the next facility. There, they also made me hand in my phone, and 2 more men in white t-shirts came to search my belongings. Afterwards, she brought me into a room with 10 beds, all separated by 4-foot-high dividers. There was a person in each bed with an IV in their arm. Some were either resting, reading, or writing. She led me to one of the empty beds and told me to get some rest. I was starting to really feel the effects of withdrawal until a nurse came over and handed me several blue pills and some water. Now, I know my pills, and these are unlike any I've ever seen. I took them with slight reluctance and managed to doze off yet again. When I woke up, this time I noticed I had an IV in my arm, and somehow I was feeling pretty good. Usually at this point, withdrawal would be in full effect. I guess whatever was in this IV was some pretty good stuff. I sat up in my bed and called over the divider to the person in the bed to the right of me. "Hey man, my name's Tony. Crazy place they got here, huh?" The person next to me turned out to be a young kid named Alex. He was skinny and kind of nerdy, with glasses and short, semi-curly black hair. "Yeah man, this place is insane. Hopefully it won't be too bad of an experience," he laughed. I knew I would like Alex right off the bat. He was a heroin junkie like me, and he seems to be a level-headed, intelligent, and a pretty modest guy. We talked for a while about who we were and a bit about how we got to this point, when a nurse came to remove the IVs. "Thank you," I said. The nurse smiled at me. After she was nearing the end of the row of beds, I turned to Alex. "It's really weird. I'd usually be sick as hell at this point, but I feel great. I feel like I don't need to be in this detox at all." "Yeah, me too. I don't know what's in these IVs, but I never heard of anything that makes withdrawal go away so effectively," he responds. After all our IVs were removed, me and a few of the other clients made our way across the room to another area with a TV and a couple couches. There, I met Brian, a 32-year-old meth addict, Ben, a 55-year-old alcoholic, and two more heroin addicts. Matt, 34 years old, and Travis, 25. For some reason, it seemed us heroin addicts got along with each other best, and we quickly formed a little group. Me, Alex, Matt, and Travis. We started getting to know each other and ended up comfortable enough to start joking around. Matt was an engineer and had a wife back at home. He was around 5'10" and, like Alex, was very smart. Travis was around 5'8" and was definitely more of a street kid. He talked about getting into fights and selling drugs. Alex ended up being 19 years old, 5'9", and was already studying to become a doctor. Heroin really can trap anyone into its grasp. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do. Those days at Detox were very relaxing. We didn't have much to do besides joke around, eat, and watch TV. I was beginning to feel really good about the future, and I felt comfortable with my new group of friends. One thing I did notice, though, was that none of the people I spoke with were on speaking terms with their families at all, or didn't have any family altogether. The way the program worked was with a grouping system. A group of people went to detox and then sent to the main facility at the same time. The people that were there for 0 to 30 days were called caterpillars and did separate activities and meetings. 30 to 75 were called cocoons, also to separate activities and meetings. And 75 to 90 were called butterflies. Pretty lame, I thought, but I was happy I would get to stay with the people I met at Detox for my whole stay. The next that happened was a meeting with our assigned therapist to give us an overview of the program and chat a bit about ourselves. This is when I started to notice that something was wrong. My therapist's name was Jeff. Jeff was a shorter guy and had a white button-up shirt with a black tie. He had a calm but firm demeanor and almost seemed like a cross between a nerd and an army sergeant. He began by handing me a schedule. The program itself seemed pretty straightforward. A typical day went something like this. 8 to 8:15, wake up. 8:15 to 9, breakfast. 9 to 10:30, group therapy or a film on addiction. 10:30 to 12, art therapy, 12 to 12:30, lunch, 12:30 to 1, free time, 1 to 2, guest speaker, 2 to 3:30, spiritual wellness group, 3:30 to 5:30, free time, 5:30 to 6:30, dinner, 6:30 to 8, free time, 8 to 8:45, reflections group, 8:45 to 10, meditation, prayer, wind down time, free time, 10 o'clock, lights out. This was all pretty average, but my conversation with Jeff was anything but. Initially, he asked pretty basic questions. He asked about my family life, what my drug of choice was, what my hobbies were. And then, out of nowhere, "Do you like the smell of blood?" This caught me off guard. I never really thought of it. I guess the smell is neutral to me, I responded. He smiled and assured me that it was all just a personality assessment. He didn't ask all the strange questions at once. It was like we'd been having a normal conversation, then all of a sudden he'd ask me, "Do you get satisfaction from hurting small animals?" This time I responded with a firm hell no. I didn't really know what to make of the whole thing. I left the office and found my way back to the main area in detox. There, I found Travis sitting in his bed. "Dude, did you meet with your therapist yet?" I asked. He looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Yeah, man. What the hell's up with that? Was that some weird test or something?" "So, he asked you those weird questions too?" I replied. We went on and were eventually joined by Alex and Matt, who had similar experiences. At our final day of detox, we split up into groups of 5, and 2 peers that had been there 30 to 75 days, cocoons, took each group on a tour of the main facility. Our tour guide was named Brian. He didn't tell us much about himself. The only thing I noticed about him was the dark circles under his eyes. He looked sullen, and maybe even a bit scared. The place itself was beautiful. They showed us the kitchen, the dining hall, the study rooms, the rooms we were going to be doing meetings in. They had a gym, a meditation room, and even a sauna. The sleeping quarters were on the left side of the building, and each person had their own personal room that contained a desk for writing, a dresser, a nightstand with an alarm clock, and a bed. They were pretty small, but it seemed nice that we all got our own rooms and didn't have to share. The property was the most amazing part. There was about a mile-long trail that made a huge circle around the buildings, and even through some of the wooded areas that surrounded. Passing by some of the other clients, I noticed that all of them had the same sullen expression that Brian did. This did disconcert me. I turned to Alex, who was in my tour group. "Dude, it looks like everyone here wants to die," I whispered to him, half joking. He seemed more worried about it than I did. "Yeah, man. I don't know what's up with that. I don't like it, though." I spoke up to our tour guide, Brian. Excuse me. When did we get to use our phones? They took mine at detox." "Phones are not permitted until you reach butterfly stage," he stated. After the tour, Brian took us back to the detox, where we spent our final evening there. Myself, Alex, Matt, and Travis grouped together in the TV room. Travis spoke up first. "I'm not sure what's going on here, but I kind of want to get away from this place." We all nodded our heads. Matt decided to go to the front desk. We all followed him. He walked up to the lady with curly hair. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm not going to stay in this place. I'm getting a ride home." She smiled at him. "I'm sorry, sir, but that is just not possible." Matt started to get upset. "Look, I just want to get the hell out of here, okay? I'm going to find a different rehab. I just don't want to be at this place." 2 of the large men in white t-shirts slowly crept behind him and put their hands on Matt's shoulder. You look like you need to rest, sir. Why don't you have a seat on your bed? No, I don't need to rest. I need to get the hell out of this place. Matt was starting to raise his voice. All of a sudden, a nurse sneaks behind him and jabbed a syringe into his arm. His body went limp as the two large men grabbed him before he fell to the floor. Travis started going insane. You can't do this, he screamed and started marching towards the two men holding Matt. He had his fists up and looked ready to brawl. All of a sudden, 2 more, then 6 men in white surrounded us. I have no idea where they all came from. They were grinning. Travis stopped dead in his tracks. You can't do this. The lady with curly hair spoke up. If you would all please head back to your beds. We're going to be going to sleep early tonight. I turned around and saw the rest of the patients from the detox staring at us. We made our ways to our beds. I shot Alex a quick glance, and his eyes met mine. I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. What the hell had we gotten ourselves into? A nurse came and handed us all 2 blue pills and some water, and she didn't leave until she made sure we took them. She even had us open our mouths to check under our tongues and our cheeks to make sure we weren't hiding them. The men in white stood like soldiers staring at us, until one by one, we all passed out. That was our final night at detox. We were all awoken at 7:30 a.m. by more men in white, and we were told that we were being taken to our respective rooms in the main building and to bring our belongings. I grabbed my bag, and we all followed the men. Everyone was silent. I peeked and glanced at Matt, and he looked dazed. He was staring at the ground, and would stumble slightly every couple of steps. I was shown to my room, number 212, on the 2nd floor, and was told to unpack my things and then to head to the dining hall for breakfast. Soon after I started to unpack, I heard screaming. I can't take it anymore. Please let me go. I rushed out of my room to see one of the clients that I didn't recognize with 2 men in white on top of him. One had his arm in some sort of wrist lock, and the other was holding his legs down. I went back into my room, but kept the door slightly ajar so I could listen. You're going to have to calm down, one of the men said. He started sobbing. Please, I just want to see my parents. Please, I can't take it anymore. There was more sobbing, and then everything went silent. After 3 or 4 minutes, I crept back into the hallway. Everyone was gone. I noticed that there was a small folded-up piece of paper on the ground where all the commotion took place. I quickly stuck it in my pocket, and then rushed to finish unpacking. When I was done, it was 8 a.m. I looked at my schedule. 15 more minutes until breakfast. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the paper. This is what was on it. Rules for survival. Don't ever leave your room from 2:30 a.m. to 3 a.m., no matter what. Never veer off the trail that goes around the buildings, and never explore the far ends of the grounds off the trail. If someone comes to your door at night while you're trying to sleep, do not let them in, no matter what they say. They will try and convince you to come out. If you hear scratching at night, do not investigate. Stay in your room until it passes. One day during your stay, you will receive a tape on the desk in your room. You must watch it. The day will come randomly, and it happens to everyone. There is a man that appears in the meditation room at 3:15 a.m. every night for around 15 minutes. It is not known who or what he is, but I believe he is friendly. Never talk back to staff. Never look the owner in the eye for longer than 10 seconds. Never do any drugs that you are offered or find here. Sometimes random people or other peers will offer them to you. Do not take them. It is very rare, but I've heard of people waking up in the basement with no recollection of how they got there. Do not shine a light. You will have to feel your way out to the stairs in the dark. Do not interact with anyone or anything you find down there. Once you climb up the stairs, you will pass out and find yourself in your room again. If a man named Dr. Jacobs leaves a note on your door telling you to meet him in office 203, do not go. Just skip it. Never go into room 217. Never try to run away. You will pass out at some point and wake up in your room, and that's if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, the creatures in the woods will get you. If you do somehow manage to make it far enough out of the grounds, do not trust anyone offering to give you a ride. If you meet the man with no face, he may seem helpful or trustworthy. He is not. Do not interact with him. Try to stay in good physical shape. It seems that people tend to wither away if they're stagnant in this place. The staff never go near the sauna. They won't be able to hear you there. Do not be tardy to anything. Do not give them a reason to mistrust you. At the bottom were the words scrawled. You can make it out of this. You will see your family again. I studied the note several times. What the hell was this? I shuddered. The note creeped me out, but it also confused the hell out of me. I decided that I would show it to Alex during breakfast. I had to show it to someone. I checked the clock, and it was 8:12. I didn't have much time. I sprinted down the stairs to the dining hall. I made it to the dining hall, right at 8:15 on the dot. I scanned the area to search for Alex, and I noticed that there were men in white walking up and down each aisle. The dining hall itself had 3 large sections. Caterpillars, 0 to 30 days, were in one area closest to the door. Then the cocoons, 30 to 75 days, were in the middle. And finally, the butterflies, 75 to 90 days, were in the back corner. In total, there were about 60 people, 20 caterpillars, 30 cocoons, and 10 butterflies. I soon discovered Alex sitting at a table with just Matt and Travis. I cautiously walked over and sat down. Alex looked on the verge of tears. Matt was staring off straight at the wall and still looked pretty zonked out, and Travis had his eyes fixed on the ground with his hands clenched into fists. Our silence was tense and awkward until Travis spoke up.
Guys, we gotta get the hell out of here.
Alex broke down crying.
We're trapped. There's no way out.
There was a moment of stillness, and I shifted my eyes upwards. I noticed that one of the men in white had stopped several feet from our table. I whispered to them urgently. Look, guys, we can't talk about this here. They're listening. But I think there might be a place we can. We'll meet during free time. The rest of lunch was quiet, and the hall was filled with anxious energy. A few words were uttered around the room, but it was mostly silent. Some of the other peers also got up to get their meals, but none of us were hungry, so we just sat there, peeled to our chairs, waiting to see what would happen next. 5 minutes before 9 a.m., a voice boomed over the room.
Split up and head to groups.
We were gathered by the men in white, and I followed the caterpillar group into a room with a circle of chairs and a large television. A tall, skinny man with lanky arms and glasses walked to the center of the area. We all took a seat, and for a moment, everything was still. "Good day, friends. Today we will be viewing a film on how our choices may lead us to dark places," he said. Something about his voice sounded all off. It almost sounded like a pre-recorded message playing out of a tape recorder, kind of staticky and robotic. I also noticed his lips were very slightly out of sync with the words that were spoken. Everything went dark, and the TV illuminated the room. On the screen flashed pictures of people overdosed, dead with needles in their arms. There were images and videos of people committing suicide by cutting and hanging themselves. Mutilated corpses and people smiling with their skin flayed off. There was even a 5-minute section of someone horribly abusing what seems to be their spouse and her begging him to stop. I was mortified, and I looked away from the screen, only to meet eyes with a man in white with a clipboard. He smiled at me, then wrote something down. I quickly discovered that they were keeping notes on who was and wasn't watching. Every time someone even closed their eyes for too long, this guy on the clipboard somehow knew. I had to endure the rest of the film. The lights eventually came on, and before I could even gather myself, that same booming voice filled the room. "Next group." We were again quickly ushered into another room. This room had a long table with paintbrushes, and paper in front of each chair. It was led by a woman that could only be described as what a witch would look like. She had a large, pointy nose and a constant scowl. Her voice had the same scratchy tape recorder-like effect to it, and half of her face seems to droop down. She told us to paint what we believed our death will feel like. At this point, my heart was beating out of my chest. I was pouring down sweat, and I was so dizzy, I felt like I could faint. I grabbed the red paintbrush and began making jagged red lines with black dots throughout. The witch lady made long laps around the table every so often, whispering in someone's ear or grabbing their paper and tearing it to shreds, screaming at them to start over. I glanced at Alex, and he was shaking uncontrollably, eyes like a wild animal, as he tried to steady his hand enough to paint anything on his paper. Eventually, the lady made it to me and whispered, "No one will notice when you die." And she spat on my paper. The group ended, and we were hustled back into the dining hall for lunch. I sat at a random table and stared straight at the ground, not even glancing at my peers the entire time. I knew I had to make it out of here somehow. After lunch, there was a period of free time. I found Alex, Matt, and Travis, and told them to follow me immediately, and we headed down to the sauna. The sauna was located in the far corner of the lower right wing of the building. When we got there, I scanned the area for any men in white, but I didn't see a single person. I opened the door and ordered them inside. "Guys, I don't know what the hell is going on in this place, but you have to look at this note I found. I think it's really important, and I think we need to follow its rules to stay safe," I stammered. Travis spoke up. "I don't care about your note. I'm running away from here the second I have a chance." "No," I yelled. "You can't do that. Just, please, read it." There was a moment of silence. I reached into my pocket and handed the note over. Alex grabbed it, and they huddled around him. For a full 10 minutes, they stared at the note, reading it over and over. Alex slowly handed it back to me. I spoke up. Look, I don't know what this place is, or who these people are, but we're going to get out of here. We just have to follow these rules, go to all of their sick groups, and we will come up with a plan. They all seemed unsure of what to do, but we eventually agreed to keep our heads down until we could figure something out. We left the sauna and rushed back to the main area to make it to the next group on time. This group was led by a man with a scraggly beard and large bags under his eyes. His voice almost sounded human. He spoke to us about how he used to be addicted to meth, and how he would get high and stalk women just to scare them and their families. Then, he stated how after he came to Harmony Hills, his life changed, and he is his true self now. Next was a group led by a man in a dark black cloak that also had the tape recorder voice. He dimmed the lights and told us about ancient gods in the cosmos that brought unfathomable suffering to living beings. He drew symbols on our foreheads with a black powder and had us recite chants in some strange language. There was always at least 5 to 6 large men in white with us in these groups, waiting on the outskirts of the room. They would either be taking notes or grinning at us, ready to strike anyone down that disobeyed. Finally, there were a couple hours of free time, and Alex and Matt decided it would be a good idea to scope out the exterior of the building to get an idea of how we could escape. We made sure to stay on the trail that looped around the grounds as the rules for survival suggested. The trail was actually very long and dipped into the woods quite a bit. As we walked, one of our other peers that we were in detox with previously booked it off of the trail into the forest. After about a minute, we heard one quick scream, a loud, tearing sound, and then silence. I made a vow right then to follow these rules no matter what. We went to dinner and actually ate the food this time. We were all going to do our best not to do or say anything incriminating. After dinner, we spent the rest of our free time scouring the building for any clues on how we could escape. On one of the upper floors on the right wing, there was a long hallway of all locked doors. I figured there had to be something inside one of those that could help us. There were always men in white walking the halls and checking on everyone, and we had no idea if there were hidden cameras throughout the building. We determined the only safe place to speak freely were either the sauna or the trail. The final group of the day was the Reflections group. The caterpillars were all joined in one room, and we went around in a circle and were told to reflect on how we could improve our recovery. This group was only led by peers, but obviously also had several men in whites looking over us. I said some generic answer like, I need to focus on bettering myself and completing my goals, or something like that. Every single person in that room also had the same kind of generic answer that I did. We all looked like trapped and abused animals, spouting off whatever would make the men in white happy. There was a bit more free time before bed, and we were all exhausted. We went back to the sauna. It seemed Matt had finally come to his senses because he came up with the idea that I should write copies of the rules, so we all could have one. I scrawled down at least 7 more of those notes and handed them to Alex, Travis, and Matt, and kept a couple extras for myself. We didn't really have any sort of plan yet. The only real idea was from Travis. He said if we could get enough people to join them, then we could start a riot and kill the men in white and the other staff, and make it out of here somehow. Not the best plan, considering we had no clue how many staff there were, and we had no idea what was out in those forests. I went up to my room and lied down. I thought about how I didn't see any cars in the parking lot, and wondered where all the staff were sleeping. There seems to be so many all over the place all the time. It had to be somewhere. As I was drifting off, I thought about my parents and my ex-girlfriend until I eventually fell asleep. I had a dream that I was chasing a snake through a field. I was terrified of what was around me, but I kept my eyes peeled on the snake, following its every movement. Suddenly, I jolted awake out of bed to the sounds of furious scratching at my door. My eyes were wide open, and I could audibly hear my heart thumping in my chest. After only about another second, it stopped. I turned on my light and waited.
Anthony, honey, are you in here? I've come to take you home. Come out here, quick.
It was my mom. How did she find me? I rushed to the door and began to turn the knob. Then right as it began to open, I froze. The rules. If someone comes to your door at night, do not let them in, no matter what they say. I stayed in that position for a full minute until I slowly shut the door and walked backwards back to my bed. I stood there for a moment, and then I heard a faint sound of what sounded like a child cackling, and then an animal skittering off. I laid awake in my bed the rest of the night, but there were no more sounds. It went on like this for a few days. Myself, Alex, Matt, and Travis surveyed the grounds and tried to come up with a plan. The groups were always horrible and disturbing. We kept watching sick, morbid films, doing strange, dark art projects while getting screamed at, being told more about these ancient cosmic entities, and surrendering our will to them, amongst other terrible things. We even had a group where they would pick one of our peers out seemingly at random, and make the rest of us yell at them and berate them. If we didn't do what they told us to do, then we would be forced into submission holds and be given injections from the nurses. Occasionally, they would grab one of us and forcibly drag us to a place everyone called the box. If that person came back from the box, he was never the same again. I wasn't exactly sure what the box was, but I prayed I would never have to find out. Travis tried to form a group of us to fight back, but everyone seemed so resigned. They would just ignore him or tell him that he had to complete the program. I was having constant nightmares at that point, and I felt my sanity slipping from me. We all started to lose weight. It seems the food they fed us didn't do much to sustain anyone. On day 6, something broke in Matt. We were in an art therapy group where we had to create sculptures out of various animal parts. The witch lady was making her usual menacing laps about the table. But when she got to Matt, she ended up staying extra long, whispering to him. What she actually said, I will never know. But his face went completely pale. We made it to lunch, and Matt wouldn't speak a word. Though we couldn't say much around the men in white anyway, we typically at least would talk about something innocuous. Travis tried to console him. Dude, are you alright? We can make it through this by just trying to be strong. Matt glanced at him, but didn't utter a word. Instead, he slowly stood up, and then suddenly lunged at one of the men in white with a pencil that he pulled out from his waistband. He stuck the pencil right into the side of the man's neck, and a small fountain of blood erupted. Travis stood up to defend himself, but just moments later, the dining hall was littered with the men in white. They were like locusts. The one who got stabbed didn't even scream. He just turned his body, faced Matt, and formed a huge, malicious smile. 5 men were on Matt in a matter of seconds, and one grabbed Travis, forcing him back into his seat. The men were all gleefully giggling as they carried Matt's thrashing body out of the dining hall. The man with the pencil in his neck just sauntered into another room, without even removing it. The whole room fixed its eyes on us. Alex broke out in tears, and Travis sat there with his hands on his face and elbows on the table for the rest of lunch. Afterward, we headed out of the dining hall into a common area. The man with long, lanky arms and glasses, who ran the first groups of the day, stopped us before we could sit down. "The owner would like to speak with all of you. Head up to the top floor, and you will be escorted to his office." He smiled. His eyes looked predatory and excited. We didn't say a word. I think we were all still in shock. When we arrived at the top floor, a man in white brought us to the hallway with locked rooms and had us sit on some chairs that were outside one of the doors. I subtly managed to grab Alex and Travis's attention and whispered, "Don't look him in the eyes." After only a minute or so, the door opened and we were beckoned in by a deep, groaning voice. "Come in, please. Come in." We all had our eyes glued to the floor as we tentatively walked into the room, but I managed to get a peek at our surroundings. The office actually looked pretty normal. It had a large, brown, worn couch and black table with papers and a laptop on it. It sort of looked like a high school principal's office. There was also a wide file cabinet pressed into the corner of the room, with a stand carrying several vials of unknown liquid on top. We all sat on the couch, keeping our heads fixed down at our laps. "It has come to my attention that an acquaintance of yours has caused somewhat of a disruption in our community." His voice was raspy and guttural. It sounded almost strained, and I could feel his eyes burning into me. Alex was the first one to respond. Sir, we don't know what got into him, but we sincerely apologize for his behavior. Please, we don't want to cause any further disruption." He let out a thunderous laugh that shook the room. "I can taste the fear in you, child. But you mustn't fret. Your friend has been sent to a psychiatric care facility, where he will be treated respectfully. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to help you fulfill your potential. But I must be certain there will not be another incident." I knew this was nonsense, and rage filled my body. "You're going to kill him," I screamed out. I didn't even realize the words had escaped my mouth until it was too late. He let out another roaring laugh. "Look at me," the owner shouted. I felt my head shoot up before I had a chance to resist. He was an older man, skin stretched right across his face. He had white hair with a long ponytail resting across his body. His arms were frail and skinny, and at first he didn't look nearly as imposing as I thought he would. That was until I met his eyes. They were glowing black and had an unnatural shine to them. As I stared, I heard the desperate screams and cries of people being tortured. I heard my parents crying, and all of a sudden, I was in a different room entirely. It was a completely empty gray cement room with a single mirror on the wall. I sat there for a couple seconds, too terrified to move. I searched the area and eventually, cautiously, made my way to the mirror. When I looked at the reflection, it seemed I was somehow a child again. I had my old pajamas on that I had when I was a kid, and I looked as though I hadn't eaten or slept in days. I was confused and terrified. I didn't know what to do. I started screaming and frantically feeling the walls for any sort of way out of this prison. Eventually, I just fell on the ground, sobbing. I cried for what felt like hours, until the tears ran dry. I started rapidly breathing and noticed myself starting to slip into a panic attack when I felt a sharp pain on my foot. I turned my head, and somehow I was back in the owner's office, staring at Travis. I was shaking, completely bewildered as to what had just happened. The owner let out yet another of his deafening laughs. I sense that there will be no more issues. You all may leave now. Travis and Alex stood up, and Travis grabbed my arm and pulled me to the door. We made our way down the hallway and to the stairs. What happened? I managed to stammer out. You looked at his face, dude. I had to do something, Travis said. But what did you do? I don't know what's going on. Is this real? He noticed my confusion, and we all stopped. No, man. You started looking at him and wouldn't look away. So after like 6 or 7 seconds, I stomped on your foot, he said. I didn't know what else to say, so we just quietly made our way back down to the dining hall. When we arrived, there were only minutes left until the next group. That night, as I lay in bed, my mother's voice came to my door again. She berated me, telling me I was a failure that was going to die a junkie, and then laughed at me until morning. Matt didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. The situation was becoming dire, but we were all too paralyzed with fear to do anything about it. The groups were starting to take a bigger toll on my mental health as well, and I was having night terrors constantly. I would wake up screaming only to realize where I was, and an overwhelming sense of dread would come over me. Every now and then, people would get taken away from breaking the rules. They were either sent to the box, or were never seen again. Some people even took their chances and ran into the forest, but I am certain that most, if not all of them, died. During my free time, I started keeping a journal of the atrocities I was enduring, and would write letters to my family, hoping that one day they would see them. I had no idea how much time had passed at this point, and I slowly began resigning myself to whatever fate was designed for the ones who finished this horrifying program. As my hope started dying, my relationship with Alex and Travis started dwindling as well. None of us really spoke much to each other, or anyone else for that matter. It took the death of another one of my peers to reignite the fire for survival in me once again. His name was Danny, and he was a young kid. I couldn't have been over 18. He had long brown hair, swept to the side of his face, and he had an innocence about him that remained even after it had been lost in the rest of us. We were in one of our spirituality groups, and the leader of the group, the tall, menacing robed man, loomed over us with his malevolent aura. On that particular day, we had just been lectured about a certain ancient god, whose name I cannot begin to pronounce, and how he would reveal himself with the demand of a sacrifice. He left the room, and we all stared at each other with fearful anticipation. After 5 minutes or so, he came back with a brown box that was closed shut, and he had us begin to recite a selection of chants in a strange language. He then made a circle in black powder and urged us to continue chanting, while he slowly reached his hands into the box. Right as he pulled it out, I heard a scream. "No, you can't do this." It was Danny. The robed man had pulled out a small puppy, who couldn't have been over a year old, out from the box. Danny started to charge the man, but the men in white were on him quickly. "You weak child. Now you will be the main attraction to our special guest." Danny was sobbing. Everyone in the room froze. "Do not stop the ritual," the robed man yelled. "Then bring the boy to me." We all continued the chant hesitantly. The men in white grabbed Danny and forced him to his knees in front of the black circle. The man then pulled out a ceremonial knife from out of his robe. Danny was bawling and struggling, but was no match for the men holding him down. The rest of us just continued our chant, terrified of what was about to come. "Let this innocent soul be your gateway to our universe," the robed man said. He then slit the throats of the puppy. There was a quick yelp, and blood sprayed over Danny's face. Before anyone else could react, there were sparks jumping out of the black circle, and dark shades of blue and purple dancing above it. A crack formed seemingly right out of thin air, and a giant tentacle shot into the room. It slithered and swatted, knocking pictures off the wall and breaking chairs. A large red eye appeared in the center of us, staring at everyone with intense hatred. All of a sudden, the tentacle latched onto Danny's face and dragged him through the crack. Everyone was still. The monster was gone, and the cracks disappeared along with Danny. The robed man let out a smile, and the men in white hastily escorted us out of the room. It all happened so fast. I felt my anger growing inside me. I ran outside and onto the trail. I kept going and going, trying to burn off that intense fury. I stumbled onto the ground and broke down, sobbing. I wanted to be back home. I wanted to see my mom. I wanted a life again. I had to think of something. There had to be some way out of this place. I reached into my pocket and grabbed the list of rules. I read over them slowly to see if there were any clues. The only thing that stood out was the man in the meditation room. Maybe he could help me. Whoever wrote this note thought he was friendly. I made a plan to sneak out of my room right at 3 a.m. to go talk to him alone. The rest of that day went by slowly. I basically just zoned out during the groups and didn't speak with anyone. Eventually, I made it to lights out and went up to my bedroom. I knew I had to do something to keep myself preoccupied so I wouldn't doze off. So I started pacing and doing sit-ups and push-ups. 12 a.m. came along, and I heard the familiar scratching at my door. Whatever was on the other side of the door was using my childhood best friend's voice to try and entice me to exit the room. But I wasn't falling for it.
Tony, it's me, dude. It's Zach. Come on. I'm coming to get you the hell out of here.
Yeah, right, I thought. I don't know what the creature had in mind for me if I did open up, but there was no way I was going to find out. Finally, it was 2:30 a.m., and I began mentally preparing myself to sneak down to the meditation room. I knew I couldn't leave until right at 3 a.m., because the rules stated to never exit your room from 2:30 to 3 a.m. I also had to figure out the best way to sneak past the guards at night, if there were any. Right at 3 a.m. on the dot, I slowly opened my door and crept out into the hallway. There was an incredibly ominous feeling to the building this late at night. I slightly crouched down and made my way to the stairs. I heard some commotion near the bottom of the stairs, so I kept still. I peered down and saw a couple men in white, presumably taking laps to see if anyone was sneaking around. They seemed to avoid the actual hallways where all the clients' rooms were. Probably because there were evil creatures scampering around at night, trying to trick us into letting them into our rooms. I made my way to the bottom of the stairs, and then dashed into one of the lounge areas. I hid behind a couch until I heard their footsteps grow quiet. Thank God no one heard me, because I thought I was being loud in the silence of the night. The meditation room was closed now. I gently walked down the hall and opened the door. I made it. I couldn't tell what time it was, but I figured that it only took me about 5 minutes to get there. I grabbed a meditation pillow and sat down. I was wondering what this guy would be like. No one was friendly at Harmony Hills, so I was a bit reluctant to think someone would actually try and help me. I leaned back against the wall, and for a moment, I lost myself in thought. "Hello, friend." That startled me out of my trance. I didn't even see or hear anyone walk in. This guy just suddenly appeared there. He looked like an old man, maybe in his 60s or 70s. He had dark brown skin and long black hair that he had tied in a bun. He was also very skinny and was wearing a slight grin. His smile did not seem malevolent, though, like the men in white had. It was actually very endearing. It might have been the first person I've seen wearing an authentic smile in weeks. Hi. My name's Anthony, and I really need your help. This place and these people torture us, and I need to escape. I don't know what to do, and I don't think I can survive here much longer. Please, can you help me?" I responded frantically, but all he did was patiently smile and wait for me to finish. "You must clear your mind before you can escape, my friend. Come, sit with me and breathe." Look, I really don't have time for this. Do you know a way out of here or not?" He seemed way too relaxed, though at this point I didn't even know if he was actually a human or some other being. But I wasn't having it. I needed some form of hope, or I was going to go insane. "You're in a mental prison, as well as a physical one, my friend. After you are free from your mental prison, you will be able to break out of the physical. Now sit with me and breathe. The answers will come to those who seek it." I almost got up and left right then. But something about his genuine smile made me humor him. "Okay, so after I sit with you and breathe, then you'll tell me." "After you sit with me, you will tell yourself." He laughed. I sighed. "Okay, I guess I'll just have to sit with this guy," I reasoned. I pulled up my pillow, so I was sitting next to him, and crossed my legs and closed my eyes. I started focusing on my breath, saying in on the inhale and out on the exhale. I actually had learned to meditate from a friend when I was trying to get clean from drugs years ago, so I somewhat knew what I was doing. After a couple of minutes of breathing, I completely lost myself. I was floating in the cosmos and felt the barriers of my body evaporate. I lost all concept of time. It was like this guy somehow drastically enhanced my meditation from just being next to him. At one point, I kept seeing images of people back in hunter-gatherer times. They were hunting by running animals down to exhaustion. I kept seeing different people running and hunting. And then, out of nowhere, I heard the light ding of a singing bowl. I opened my eyes, and the room was empty. I quickly stood up, alarmed. I had no idea how much time had passed. For all I knew, it was morning, and the men in white would have seen that I wasn't in bed. I snuck out of the meditation room and saw that it was still dark. I quietly made my way back to my room and laid down. Well, that was an experience, I thought. But it didn't really get me anywhere. I reflected on the man's words. He said I first had to escape my mental prison before I could escape the physical. So that would mean more meditation. I didn't really see how that could get me out of here. I opened up my list of rules. One of the last rules stated to stay in good physical shape. In my meditation, I kept seeing images of hunter-gatherers. Maybe exercise would help me. I started feeling my eyes grow heavy, and I fell asleep. From then on, I began exercising every day and seeing the meditation man during the nights. Slowly, my mind and body became stronger, and I was able to withstand the groups. Even the nightmares began to dissipate. I tried to get Alex and Travis to sneak to the meditation room with me, but they seemed too far gone at that point. They would tell me I just had to finish the program, and everything would get better. It was sad to see them that way. I knew that nothing good would come after finishing the program. The days flew by, and the groups weren't bothering me at all. I was able to zone out during them and do what they told me to do without having any mental attachment to it, if that makes sense. And I was getting into great shape. Though all that would come to an end soon. One day, 2 men in white came up to me, Alex, Travis, and whoever was left from our old detox group, and told us we were moving on to cocoon phase. And that is when I began my experience with a whole new kind of hell. Later that night, I made my normal trip to the meditation room. I was used to getting greeted by the man's beaming smile, but tonight was different. He almost looked a bit solemn. "I have come to grow fond of you," he spoke. "They say attachment leads to suffering, but it is not to be avoided like a disease. It is within our suffering that we create meaning." He took a deep breath and continued. "Your next journey in this hell will test you more than anything you have endured so far. It breaks even the strongest of minds. You will need help to get through it intact." I felt scared. I couldn't imagine it getting any worse than it already was. I was just getting used to being able to withstand the groups, and now it was going to get even harder. "Well, when am I going to be able to escape here? I don't know if I can handle any more abuse." I responded in a somewhat aggressive tone, which I regretted. I knew this man or entity or whatever was only trying to help me and didn't deserve any malice. "You are not ready to escape. When you are ready, you will know. I will assist you when I am able, but you must look for the signs." He spoke in his same peaceful tone. I sighed. At this point, this guy was the only thing that gave me any sort of hope. I really had to trust him. We began our nightly meditation, but this time it was difficult to get myself calm. I had racing thoughts about what horrible things would inevitably occur during the cocoon phase. Eventually, I heard that familiar ding of the singing bowl, and I opened my eyes to an empty area. I snuck out to my room, which, at this point, I had gotten really good at, and I lied down. The rest of the night was silent, and I fell asleep with ease. I woke up that morning covered in sweat. I must have had a nightmare, but I couldn't remember any details about it. My alarm clock hadn't gone off yet, so I just laid in bed for a little while. I was wondering what would happen to me during the cocoon phase. I even kind of laughed to myself purely out of the absurdity of my situation. Why the hell were these people getting off on torturing us? There must have been some insane reason. I reflected on Danny, and I grew bitter. What was that awful monster that pulled him through the crack in the air? It almost seemed like the robed man's ritual summons that beast from a different dimension or something. After a bit more pondering, I heard my alarm clock go off, and I made my way to the dining hall for breakfast. I sat at a random table with people I hadn't spoken a word to ever, and we all ate silently. I scanned the dining hall, and I noticed that Travis and Alex were sitting at separate tables. They both had gotten large bags under their eyes, and they looked very frail and skinny. I wanted to help them. I had to at least convince one of them to meet the meditation men and start exercising with me. I decided that Travis would probably be the easiest to convince. I got up and sat in an empty chair next to him. Meet me at the start of the trail during free time. I didn't even wait for a response. I just got up and went back to my original table. Then, right as I finished my food, I heard a familiar voice. Group time. A large group of men in white gathered everyone in the cocoon phase, and we all walked upstairs to the same row of locked doors that myself, Alex, Matt, and Travis had found a while back when we were exploring the grounds. There were around 40 of us, including the men in white, so we hardly even fit in the long hallway. One of the men reached out into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He went to the far room and unlocked the door. 10 of you at a time. You know the drill, he said. 5 men in white ushered 10 of my peers into the room, and 5 men in white stood behind us. I happened to be towards the middle of the group, so I didn't have to go in at first, but some of my peers had to be physically forced into the room. Some of them were even crying and shaking, but no one was pleading with them or begging them to stop. We stood restlessly in the hallway for a full hour, until the door opened up again. First, the men in white walked out with wide grins on their faces, and then the patients came out. We all had to press up against the walls so they could pass. All of them walked slowly with their heads down, staring at the ground, and not saying a word. I happened to see Alex as he passed me. His eyes were wide, and he had a terrified expression on his face. The same 5 men in white then escorted me and 9 other patients into the room. I don't know exactly what I expected, but it certainly wasn't this. The room was huge and only lit with a dim purple light. There were 10 large pools filled with water on the ground, all of which were all right next to one another. Line up, one of the men in white yelled. Everyone quickly formed a line behind me. One of the men in white went to the corner of the room, where a bouquet of large purple and yellow flowers was sitting in a vase on a chair. He pulled one of the flowers out. Kneel down, he commanded me. I knew I could not do anything to stop him, so I complied with his demand. He then plucked a petal off and had me open my mouth, and he placed the petal on my tongue. It dissolved almost immediately, and another man in white came up behind me and blindfolded me. Next, he lifted me up like I weighed nothing and placed me into one of the pools. Lie down. I laid in the pool, and I found that I was floating. I suddenly knew what this was. This was some sort of sensory deprivation tank. As for the flowers, I had no idea, but I had actually been in a sensory deprivation tank before. Though they usually had a lid to prevent any light from getting in, this time I had a blindfold on. For a couple minutes, I really didn't know what the big deal was. I actually really enjoyed sensory deprivation tanks, and I didn't think lying in one for an hour would be that bad. Then the hallucinations started. At first, it wasn't too bad. I would see glowing geometric patterns, but they were all asymmetrical and out of place. If you've ever done DMT, it was similar to that, except the patterns were all out of place and were harsh colors. It began to burn my eyes. I was about to tear my blindfold off because it was hurting so badly when I found that I couldn't move my body. I started to panic. I couldn't even open my eyes in the blindfold. The patterns started getting more jagged, and it felt like they were piercing through my eyes. Eventually, my whole body felt like it was on fire. It kept hurting more and more. I thought I was going to die. I didn't know a human could experience so much pain without dying. It kept going and going until the patterns morphed into daggers of glowing light that jabbed into my eyes. I had to do something before I completely lost my mind. In a moment of clarity, I thought of the meditation man. I tried to focus on my breath, but it seemed impossible. I would get a couple of breaths in and then lose my focus because of the intense pain. After what felt like hours had passed, I felt someone grab my arm and drag me out. My blindfold was torn off, and I saw that it was one of the men in white. I still couldn't move, so I laid there while the men in white dragged everyone else out of their respective pools. He then physically opened my mouth and placed one of the yellow flower's petals on my tongue. Right away, I felt all my limbs come to life. I could move again. I slowly stood up, and the men in white threw us all towels to dry off. Then, he commanded us to exit the room. I walked slowly, with my head down past my peers. I went to one of the lounge rooms and sat on a couch and cried until lunch. I then proceeded into the dining hall and got my food and sat down at a random table in the cocoon section again. I didn't even look to see who was sitting with me. I just stared at my food. I tried to eat, but my hand was shaking so badly I could hardly get the food to my mouth. After lunch, I rushed down to the sauna. I prayed that Travis would come to meet me. I didn't want to be alone in this. I wanted someone to escape with, and I knew it had to be soon. After about 20 minutes, Travis showed up and sat down next to me.
"You're right, man. You're right. We have to get out of here."
He started crying. I awkwardly tried to comfort him by putting my hand on his back. "We can do this. Just listen to me. I found someone who is willing to help us. It's going to sound weird, but the first thing you need to do is start exercising. Use the gym or run around the trail. It'll help. Tonight, I'll sneak out right at 3 a.m. and come into my room. Do not knock or anything. Just come right in." I left it like that and walked away out of the sauna, leaving Travis with his thoughts. Next, I went to one of the lounge areas and sat on one of the couches. Right as I was starting to get comfortable, I hear, "Next group." I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle another group like that. I would have rather killed myself. I didn't get up with my peers. I just kept sitting while everyone else was being brought to the next group. A minute passed, and I actually thought for a second they were going to leave me be, when I felt someone yank me by my hair off of the couch. He started dragging me by my hair, and then dropped me on the ground.
"Get up. It's group time."
He laughed at me. I followed him upstairs to another one of the rooms with locked doors. Another man in white brought out his keys and opened 3 of the doors on the opposite side of the hall. He then separated us into groups of 10, and a man in white led each group into one of the rooms. My group happens to have both Alex and Travis in it. In the room was another robed man and a bunch of what looked like dentist chairs. I couldn't quite make out what the robed man looked like, because this room was also only lit with a dim purple light. He then had all of us lie in the chairs while he placed a cap on our heads that had multiple cords coming out. The cords were long and went into the walls. The robed man advanced to the center of the room and started reading from a huge, ancient-looking book. I have no idea what he said. It was all in some strange language. But after a minute, I felt my eyes grow heavy, and I started to drift off to sleep. I started having memories of my best friends when we were kids. We were playing this game we made up called hide and go seek. The way it was played was that one person was a guard. He had an airsoft gun, which are basically weaker BB guns that only stung a bit when you got shot from a distance. The rest of the people playing were assassins. They would hide and try to sneak up and fake stab the guard with the airsoft gun. I was the guard this time, and we were playing at my friend Tom's house. As I was walking around, my friend Craig popped out of the corner and fake stabbed me. "I got you," he yelled gleefully. "No, that doesn't count. I saw you go inside. That's off limits," I responded. "No, I didn't. I didn't lie. I got you. I won." He kept rubbing it in my face, and I felt myself getting more and more angry. "Screw you," I said. "Don't be so mad that you suck at this game so bad." All of a sudden, I felt my rage boil over, and I tackled him to the ground and started beating him with my airsoft gun. "Stop! Please stop!" he screamed. But it just made me go harder. My only friends tried to get me off of him, but it was too late. I jammed the airsoft gun into his eye and pulled the trigger. Now, from point-blank range, the airsoft gun can do some damage. And when I shot him, he went blind in that eye for the rest of his life. My other friends were yelling at me. Tom called for his mom, and she called 911. I just sat outside of their driveway until my parents came and got me. I had to go to a kid's psychiatric unit for my outburst, and I lost all of those friends. Except none of that happened. I mean, me and my friends used to play hide-and-go-seek, but I never beat my friend and shot his eye. Or did I? I couldn't recall that moment correctly anymore. For all I knew, I actually did beat up Craig and blind him in one eye. I don't remember what actually happened. Then, suddenly, I awoke. A man in white pulled off the cap on my head, and we were again told to leave the room. During free time, I went up to my room. I sat on my bed and tried to recollect what actually happened that day with my friends, but all I could see was me beating Craig senseless. It all seemed so real. They must have messed with my memories somehow. I would have never beat my friend like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I believed that it actually happened. I lied down and tried to take my mind off of that event when I saw a black videotape on my nightstand that I didn't notice before. No, I didn't have a TV in my room, let alone a VCR. I knew that some of the group rooms had TVs, but who even used VCR nowadays? I grabbed the tape and went downstairs. I knew the rules stated that I had to watch this tape, but I wasn't even sure I could trust the rules anymore. They did lead me to the meditation man, though, so I decided that it would probably benefit me to watch it. I went to one of the group rooms, and it actually did contain a VCR. I looked outside the door to check if anyone was around, and it was all clear. I guessed that everyone was probably either in their rooms, out on the trail, or in one of the lounge areas during free time. No one wanted to be in any of the group rooms when they didn't have to be. I turned on the old television and put the tape in the VCR. The first thing that flashed on the screen was an image of a naked, incredibly pale man with long arms and legs. He was in a forest, and he looked like he was searching for something frantically. Immediately, the screen cut to maggots all over a dead body, and then quickly cut to a basement. It was kind of hard to see because it was so dark, but I could make out 3 children who were sitting and tied to a support beam. They weren't moving or talking. The middle child started opening his mouth.
It kept opening more and more until I heard a crack, and then the screen switched to an image of a yellow door. It stayed on the door for about a minute, until a man in a suit entered the frame and painted the numbers 117 on it in black, and then painted a snake below it. Was this a sign? The rules stated to never enter room 117, but how did this tape know that my favorite animal was a snake? It could have maybe been a coincidence. I didn't have long to think about it when the screen flashed to a black and white image of a lighthouse. The waves were crashing over the rocks, and giant tentacles started to come out of the water and wrap around the lighthouse. Then it switched to a video of a woman with black hair covering her face. She was rocking back and forth in a rocking chair in the corner of an old, dilapidated room. She gradually raised her hand and pointed at me. There was a loud scream, and then the screen went black. The scream scared the hell out of me, and I jumped. That was it. The tape didn't really do anything to me, but creeped me out a bit. I wondered if the man painting on the yellow door was one of those signs the meditation man notified me about. I took the tape out and threw it in the trash. I checked the time on the clock, and it was already dinner time. After dinner, we didn't have any more groups. I guess in cocoon phase, we only had the torture of the sensory deprivation tanks and the memory altercations. But these groups were hundreds of times worse than what we were experiencing in the caterpillar phase. I tried to get Travis's attention, but he wouldn't talk to me. The only thing he said was, "He'll see me at 3 a.m. I went to my room and decided to see if I could fall asleep while I waited. I set my alarm for 2:55, and I actually ended up dozing off pretty swiftly. I woke up, and it was pitch black. The first thing I noticed was that I was not, in fact, in my room, and also that I was lying on cement. I suddenly became fearful. Where the hell was I? I felt around and came upon a flashlight. Well, I was lucky, I thought. I was about to turn it on when I heard a child giggling. This certainly freaked me out, but it also reminded me of the rules. You may wake up in the basement with no recollection of how you got there. Do not shine a light. You will have to feel your way out. I had to get out of here. I needed to show Travis the meditation man. It was almost like Harmony Hills itself was trying to prevent me from bringing Travis to the meditation room with me, so I knew that I really had to do it. I smashed the flashlight on the ground and stood up. I slowly crept forward, keeping my hands in front of me, so I wouldn't run into anything. As I was walking, I kept hearing children giggling and running off. At one point, I yelled at them. "Would you shut the hell up?"
Don't use naughty words, mister.
They responded. It caught me off guard a bit. Was there actually a child down here? There's no way. Are you okay? Do you need help or something?
No, mister. You're the one who needs help.
It giggled, and then ran off. I shuddered. I quickly remembered that I broke part of the rule. I interacted with something in the basement. I tried not to think about it, and kept going. After a couple more steps, I felt something breathe on the back of my neck. It was freezing cold, and smelled rancid, like a dumpster with spoiled food in it. I shut my eyes and kept moving forward. I eventually ran into a wall, so I turned to my left and kept going. It seemed to go on forever. I would go straight for a while, and then hit a wall. Then I would alternate between left and right turns. I knew I couldn't stop. I could hear and feel the thing that was breathing behind me, and I didn't want to agitate it. The creature imitating a child was always ahead of me. It kept telling me to turn around and to meet their daddy. I started to slowly jog with my hands stretched out in front of me. I probably would have looked ridiculous in the light, but I certainly didn't stop to worry about that. Suddenly, I tripped and fell onto the stairs. I started sprinting up them as fast as I could. I made it to the top of the stairs, and there was the door. I turned the knob when something grabbed my leg and started dragging me down the stairs. My face hit one of the steps hard, and I felt blood running down my face.
Daddy's gonna eat you.
I heard the child squealing with delight. I wasn't going to die down here. I pulled my other leg back and kicked as hard as I could. I felt my foot hit something, and the grip loosened on my leg. I tore away and ran up the stairs with my hands and feet. I opened the door and crashed onto the ground. I woke up on my bed. It was 2:48 a.m. My face was aching, and I felt exhausted. I turned off my alarm and waited until 3 a.m. It was 3:04 when Travis came. He actually really startled me, even though I knew he was coming. I guess I was still on edge from the whole basement experience.
Dude, you look like hell. What happened to your face?
He asked. I ignored him. Let's go, now. Follow me and stay quiet. We don't have much time. It was slightly more difficult to sneak around the men in white with Travis, but we were still able to do it. Once we got to the meditation room, the man was waiting for us. I was beginning to think I had lost you, my friend. He smiled, and it actually made me smile a bit too. Travis wasn't as amused.
Tell me how to get out of here, right now.
His response surprised me. I never even thought of demanding the meditation man around like that. He was so peaceful and friendly. Ah, yes. You're a lion, a fighter. You must relax. Sit and breathe with us. Your time for escape will come if you allow it. He answered.
I don't have time. I need to get out of here now. You're gonna tell me, or I'm gonna make you.
Travis lunged at the meditation man. He had his hand cocked back, ready for a punch, and he threw himself right through the meditation man and onto the floor. Yes, he literally traveled right through the meditation man, like he was a ghost. The man laughed. Violence will not get you anywhere here. Sit with us. Calm your mind. The room fell silent for a second, until I stuttered out.
What are you?
He smiled widely and said, Just a friend. Travis calmed down, and we ended up sitting with the meditation man until the singing bell went off, and he was gone. Somehow, when we sat with him, it was almost like he was able to stretch time around us. I knew we only sat there for around 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes lasted much longer than normal. I also ended up asking him if he sent me a sign in the videotape, but he responded, If you felt there was a sign, then there was. I should have known I wasn't going to get any clear-cut answers from him, but I thought it was worth asking about. After the meditation, I actually saw Travis smile for the first time since detox. He thanked me for bringing him right before we quietly snuck our way back to our rooms. The next few days were horrible. The groups didn't get any easier, but Travis did start accompanying me on my meditation visits, and he also started exercising with me. I think Alex even started to notice that we looked slightly less sullen than the other patients, and I was hoping we would be able to get him to join us. But as one good thing would come, my hope would get torn away. That's how it was for me at Harmony Hills. It was maybe day 10 since I started the cocoon phase, and though the groups didn't get any easier, our meditations and exercises gave us some reprieve. I was sometimes able to differentiate between the false memories that they implanted in me, but I decided that I would worry about that later. First, I had to escape. That day, Travis and I were running on the trail during free time. We were about halfway done when another patient named Drew was walking towards us from the other direction. He stopped us from running and told us to follow him. We walked around 20 feet away from any other person, and he pulled out a little baggie with brown powder in it.
Dude, I found this tucked away in my bag. Can you believe it? He said. Is that what I think it is? Travis asked. Yes, sir, it is. This is some grade A heroin right here. I literally just found it in my bags. I got it from this drug dealer I knew back at home. I can't believe I found it. You guys can do something with me, because I love you so much. He laughed.
I saw Travis's eyes get wide, and he looked at me. Now I knew the rules stated to never do any drugs that you're offered here, but since he literally just found this stuff in his bag, and he knew where it was from, I thought that it would be okay. That was a mistake I will never forgive myself for. Before I even knew what I was saying, I blurted out.
I know where we can do this. Follow me.
We were giggling like we were kids on Christmas as we made our way to the sauna. We got there and sat down. Drew poured out a small bit of the brown powder and used a piece of paper to form it into a line.
Make sure you don't do too much, man,
I told Drew.
I know. I'm starting with this tiny bit, but look how much I have. This is so good, it'll last all of us at least a week.
He then rolled up the paper and snorted the line. He laid back and audibly sighed.
Oh, man, that is so nice.
Before I could think, Travis had already formed his line and had his head down ready to snort the powder. He did it and had the same reaction as Drew. Both of the reactions were exactly how people normally behave when doing H. So I grabbed the baggie and formed my own little line. I went down to snort it, but then I hesitated. I looked up at Drew and saw he had a nosebleed.
Hey, man, are you okay?
I asked. He didn't respond. I looked at Travis, and his nose was bleeding too. I thought maybe I shouldn't do this, when Drew's skin literally began bubbling like a pot of boiling water. I screamed.
Your skin! Dude, your skin! Yeah, man, that's good,
he stated. Then Travis's skin began bubbling. It started at their arms until eventually all of their skin was bubbling. They didn't even seem to notice what was happening. They were both still nodding out on the heroin, acting like they were in complete blissful ignorance to what was going on. I knew I couldn't get anyone to help, so I just sat there, frozen in horror, as I watched their skin bubble and then start to melt off to the bone. I snapped out of it and ran out of the sauna into my room. I cried and cried. My friend was dead, and I could have stopped it. I stayed in my room for the rest of the day until the night came along. I was in a sort of awake but coma-like state. I couldn't cry anymore, but I couldn't move my body. After a little while, I heard a light knocking at my door.
Anthony? It's Travis. Dude, why'd you run off like that?
I shot out of bed and ran to the door. I stopped right before I put my hand on the door handle. If it's really Travis, then just come in. You don't need me to open the door for you. I heard a chilling giggle.
Your friend is dead. Your friend is dead.
It sang as it sauntered off.
Go to hell, you monster.
I screamed. I walked back to my bed and decided right then that I would get some answers out of the meditation man. 3 a.m. came along, and I rushed to the meditation room. I actually almost got caught from making too much noise, but I didn't even care. I was going to go out fighting if they did catch me. Luckily, I made it there without any incident. The meditation man was sitting with seemingly no expression on his face. He looked at me and beckoned me to sit. "No," I asserted. "You're going to give me some answers right now." He thought for a second, with that same neutral expression. "Yes, I have an answer for you, but you will not like it." "Tell me," I said. "You must get yourself put into the box. If you are violent with them, they will kill you. But you must break their rules. Just nothing too drastic." "Why the hell would I want to get put into the box?" I asked. "Because they will soon replace your true memories of this place with new ones. And soon after that, you will be lost in this hell forever. Or killed. If you're in the box when this happens, it will give you some time." I thought for a second. I saw a few patients that came back from the box. All of them were completely mute after their experience. They never spoke to anyone again, and they basically acted brain dead. Their eyes were vacant, and they just did whatever the men in whites told them to do. "I'll do it," I declared. "All right, my friend. Then let me teach you a breathing technique that may aid you during your time in the box. It is called Breath of Fire. Breath of Fire was done by pumping from the center of my navel, while breathing rapidly from my nose. It took me a few days to master it. The meditation man kept telling me I was doing it wrong, and then explained it over and over again. He would say, "No, be more forceful with your exhale," or "You must feel the air enter your nose. Do not think, only do." Over those next few days, I kept going into their sensory deprivation tank and eating the hallucinogenic flower petal and having terrifying and painful trips. Many of my memories with my family were also replaced. I even tried to write down as many things as I could about my family, about how I loved them, and about my favorite experiences with them. But even the writing would somehow change itself to fit the new memories. The new memories were the worst part. Even worse than the sensory deprivation tank. I had fake memories of me berating and hitting my mom. I had memories of me abusing animals and of burning my dad's house down. I even had some where I beat up homeless people and stole what little they had. One night, the meditation man told me I was ready. "You must do it now," he said, and then he disappeared. My heart was beating in my chest. I knew what I had to do. I decided the easiest way to get put into the box would be letting them catch me sneaking around at night. So all I had to do was leave the meditation room and make a bunch of noise. I didn't want them to get suspicious, so I snuck back up to my room, then walked out and slammed the door and started screaming, "I'll kill you! I'll kill you all!" Immediately, men in white shot up the stairs, and one came from behind. I put up enough of a struggle to make it realistic, but not to actually hurt one of them. 2 of them had me by the arms and legs, and 2 were by my side, as they carried me outside. I kept struggling while all the men were smiling. "Have fun, kid. We're bringing you to the box now." One of them laughed. I almost let out a grin. "Yeah, well, that's exactly what I want you to do, you psycho," I thought. They carried me outside and started making their way towards the detox center. One of the men opened one of the steel cellar doors at the base of the detox, and we made our way down the cement stairs. I started fake pleading with them.
Wait, please. I'm sorry. Don't put me down there. Too late now, the man holding my arms said. One of the men in white pulled out a set of keys. I could only tell because of the sound. It was pitch black down there. I briefly thought of my experience in the basement, and I hoped things would go smoother than that. They opened the door, jammed me inside, and then shut and locked it. The box ended up being a 4x4-foot square room. It was clearly too small to stand or lie in, but I could sit just fine. Bright, harsh lights came on. They were similar to the lights at a supermarket or Walmart. I saw that the walls and ceilings were completely made of mirrors. I almost lost myself in the reflections until I shut my eyes. I wasn't going to let any of this get into my psyche. After a few minutes, the noises started. They were blasting the room full of horrible sounds. First, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Then it would sound like this strange static noise. Eventually, it just cut to a man's voice. He sounded like an announcer at a sports game, talking through a cheap microphone. All he would say was, "Number 1, you are number 1. And then, "Number 2, you are number 2. And he would go on for hours and hours until he reached a random number. Then, randomly, the static and nails on a chalkboard sounds would crash through my ears again. I made sure to never open my eyes because I knew that once I did, I would be lost forever. I tried shutting my ears with one hand, but it somehow did nothing to dampen the sounds. So I sat with my hands resting on my knees. The first hour I was panicked, but eventually I found my breath within the chaos. Every time an intrusive thought came along, I would breathe fire, and it would calm me down a bit more. It was at a point where I wasn't even paying any attention to anything. I felt myself float in the cosmos, just like I did when I meditated with the meditation man. A smile grew on my face. All of a sudden, I heard the lock outside jiggle, and the door swung open. I was very confused. I felt like I had only been there 24 hours max, and they were already coming to get me. A man in white grabbed my leg and dragged me back out into the world. He looked at me in the eyes, and there was visible disappointment on his face. "How'd this one make it out so intact?" he asked one of the other men in white. "I'm really not sure. Let's bring him to the owner." Oh, Christ. I really didn't want to see this guy again. They brought me back into the main building and up the stairs to the owner's room. One of the men in white went in first, and they talked for a couple minutes, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. The door opened, and the man smiled at me. "Your turn," he said. I stepped into the room with my eyes glued to the floor. I wasn't going to make the mistake of looking the owner in the eyes again. "How did you make it through the box?" he asked. I didn't respond. "Ah, you're going to stay silent with me. Well, will you at least look at me?" I felt my neck tense up. It was like something was trying to force my head up, but I kept it still. The owner let out one of his booming laughs. "Fine, fine. But it does not matter. From now on, you will never be alone. Now, leave me." He was right. From then on, there was a man in white with me everywhere I went. When I slept, when I went to the bathroom, and when I ate, there was a man in white accompanying me. I started to get nervous. I couldn't sneak out and see the meditation man if someone was always watching me. I knew I had to make a move, but I didn't know what to do. The only thing I could think of was the sign I interpreted from the videotape. The man painted the number 117 with a snake below it. I guess I had to go into room 117.
I wasn't sure exactly what to do next. I didn't want to risk the men in white seeing the meditation man. I figured that if any one of the staff knew he was there, they would have done something to prevent him from showing up. Also, it was hard to think of attempting to escape with one of the men in white always breathing down my neck. They literally were watching me sleep in shifts so that I couldn't do anything shady. That didn't prevent me from meditating on my own, though. Most of my free time was spent meditating or exercising. The sensory deprivation tank was still horribly painful, but it began to get at least partially manageable, and the meditation considerably helped to prevent my memories from changing. Though many of my memories are forever tainted. In the back of my mind, I knew they were thinking of getting rid of me. I had to make a move soon, and the only move I could think of was entering room 117. Now, I know the rules explicitly stated to never enter room 117, but the rules weren't foolproof. One of the patients wrote them. I would have tried to make contact with the guy that dropped them, but after his incident, I never saw him again. I made a plan to go into room 117 during free time. Though there were always men in white watching me, I figured I could just make a run for it really quickly while the man in white had his back turned or something. Yeah, I know it wasn't much of a plan, but there wasn't much else I could do. That day, as I was mentally amping myself up to go, I walked up to my room and there was a note on my door. Anthony, meet me in my office at 4 p.m. It is number 203. I look forward to meeting you. Dr. Jacobs was signed at the bottom. It was written in impeccable handwriting. It almost looked as though it was typed. Now, I would have certainly skipped this meeting, but since there was a man in white following me, I didn't have much of a choice.
Dr. Jacobs wants to see you. You're very lucky, you know.
The man in white had a huge smile. What happens if I skip it? I decided to just be blunt with him.
You won't be missing your meeting on my watch.
I decided to meditate before my meeting with Dr. Jacobs. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew I would have a better chance if I were in there with a clear mind. I sat cross-legged in my bed and started to focus on my breath. At first, it was difficult to stay focused with a man in white watching me, but at this point, I had gotten pretty accustomed to it. Slowly, I started to reach a point of stillness. I found myself sitting in a completely black room. I looked around for a bit, until I heard someone familiar calling my name.
Anthony.
I turned around and saw the meditation man, sitting in that same cross-legged position, with his beaming, genuine smile.
What's going on? Where am I? Is this real, or am I just imagining this?
Just because you're imagining this does not mean I'm not really here. He laughed. I thought for a second.
What should I do?
There's a man in white following me constantly. I can't escape like this. When I ring the singing bowl, you will know what to do. But for now, sit with me, my friend. This is the last time we will see each other.
Thank you, I said.
Then I closed my eyes and meditated with the man one last time. I opened my eyes and saw the man in white grinning at me.
Time to go. Follow me.
I got off my bed, stood up, and noticed that there was something tucked in my waistband. As the man in white turned around, I felt the sharp end of a razor blade prick my finger. I followed the man in white through the halls and to Dr. Jacobs' office.
Here we are,
the man in white exclaimed. I stood there for a second in front of the door, and then reluctantly went inside. In the office was a chair with arm and leg restraints and a long table with 3 bags sitting on it. In the corner was another door. The room was dark and still. Hello? Dr. Jacobs?
Yes, just give me a moment. Have a seat if you'd like.
His voice was coming from the door in the corner. There was no way I was going to sit in that chair, so I just stood in place. A couple of minutes passed, and I was staring off into space. Suddenly, the door violently swung open. A creature with pale white skin came barging in. I screamed, and the creature dashed towards me with inhuman speed, and then somehow, I blacked out. I woke up with my arms and legs restrained in the chair, and my head was violently aching. The creature was fiddling with things in the bag. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed.
Yes. Hello, Anthony. I am Dr. Jacobs.
The creature responded.
"What are you going to do to me?"
I asked. The creature laughed.
Oh, I'm going to cut you open, and then I'm going to feed you to the old gods.
I felt my heart racing. Is this how I was going to die? After making it so far? No. Screw that. I had to distract this thing. Since my waist wasn't restrained, I was able to slightly lift my hips and grab the razor with my right hand while the creature was messing around with the bags on the table. Soon, after I got a hold of it, the creature turned around to face me. It was holding a serrated blade. "Your pain is very important to me, and to the old gods." I could see the creature fully now. It had long, thick strands of greasy black hair and an abnormally large face and head. Its arms, legs, and torso were long and skinny, and it had small, completely white, beady oval eyes. The most notable feature was its huge mouth, which extended its face wider and had a full set of jagged yellow teeth. The way it moved was almost playful or dance-like.
Before I begin, I would like to answer some questions you might have about our little program.
I had to stall him. "Who were the men in white?" I asked.
Our staff members. They were like you once. Lost souls looking for redemption. After you complete the butterfly phase, we decide whether to offer you to the old gods, or if you would be better suited as one of the men in white.
His voice was raspy and guttural, almost like it strained him to speak to me. I started cutting my right hand's restraints with the razor blade, but I didn't have a great angle at it, so it was taking some time. I had to keep stalling. "What about the people who run the groups? Who are they?"
They are my brothers. They are like me, but are wearing human skin.
He stood in front of me. He was at least 6.5 feet tall, from what I could tell, and his teeth were littered with what looked like old pieces of flesh. His breath stank like wet garbage. I balled my fists to hide the razor in my hand, and I prayed that he didn't see that the restraint was partially cut.
Now, would you like me to start with your fingers or your toes?
My heart was racing. "Toes!" I exclaimed quickly.
Good choice.
He bent down and began sawing my pinky toe off. The pain was excruciating. Each time he went back and forth, he counted.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 cuts for the pinky toe.
My breath grew hoarse from screaming. He left for a moment to grab something from the bag, and then bent over by my feet again. I felt a searing hot pain as he cauterized the stump where my pinky toe had been. I started crying. I couldn't even help it. The pain was too much. He turned around again, and I was frantically working on getting my right hand's restraint off. It was about 3/4 of the way through when he faced me again. He held the serrated blade in front of me and licked the blood off. Then he began working on my next toe.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, looks like we finished that one quicker.
He laughed. "Do my finger. Please, do my fingers," I cried.
Oh, you want your fingers done now, do you? Well, I can't have you dying of blood loss just yet.
He cauterized my other wound. I didn't think I would experience pain worse than the deprivation tanks, but this was pure torture. He went back to the table to retrieve a different blade just as I finished the restraint. I put the leather strap back over my wrist so it looked like I was still bound to the chair. He came over to me and grabbed my pinky finger. I whispered to him.
What was that?
He responded as he bent down lower to hear me. I then jammed the razor with all of my force into his neck and pulled it across as hard as I could. Black liquid spurted out across my face as Dr. Jacobs fell to the ground. He didn't even make a sound as he died. He just stared at me with complete disbelief in his eyes. I managed to hold on to the razor after I slit his throat, so I frantically started working on my other wrist's restraint. This was much faster to cut since I had a good angle on it. After I finished, my hand was cut up pretty good, but it was nothing compared to how my feet felt. I removed my left arm's restraint, then my feet. I hobbled over to Dr. Jacobs' body. I picked up his serrated blade and stabbed him repeatedly through his face and body. Then I put it in my waistband. I tried to clean the black liquid off of me the best I could with a towel that was sitting on the table. It presumably was there to clean up my own blood. My heart was still racing, and I was frantically trying to think of a plan to exit the room without suspicion. Eventually, I just decided to walk out casually and hope that no one checked in on Dr. Jacobs for a while. I gently opened the door and went into the hall. Luckily, it was all clear, so I made my way down to room 117. As I was briskly limping along, one of the men in white saw me. "You're not supposed to be alone." He eyed me with an unsure look on his face. "Yes, I just had my meeting with Dr. Jacobs. I was looking for one of you." I tried to act normal, like I didn't just stab some monster to death with a razor blade that was given to me in a hallucination. "Okay. It seems Dr. Jacob has had his fun with you. I'll escort you now." He smiled at me knowingly. "Of course. I completely see now how beneficial the program is, and I'll do everything I can to not disrupt it further." I wasn't sure if he bought it, but I was desperate to make it to room 117. I walked down the hallway and to the room. I went to open the door, but the man in white stopped me. "Where do you think you're going? You're not allowed." Before he could finish, I heard, "He killed Dr. Jacobs. Get him." Men in white came sprinting towards me, and the one next to me grabbed my throat and pressed me up against the door. I reached behind my back to grab the blade, and I stabbed him in the shoulder as hard as I could. It pierced deep into his arm, and I let go of the blade. He released my neck, and I widely opened the door and fell inside. I locked it and was getting ready to brace myself against it, until everything got quiet. No one was breaking into the room after me for some reason. I was sure they must have had a key to the room. I stayed there for about a minute or two, just to make sure no one was trying to get in. Then, I turned around. I was met by the sight of 30 or so faces staring at me. I jumped back, startled. My eyes gradually started adjusting to the dark a bit, and I could see that there were no bodies. It was as though someone just sliced off people's faces and hung them all up around the room at various heights. There was also a large dinner table in the middle of the room, with a man sitting on a chair facing away from me. The man was completely still and didn't even react to me barging in. I stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do. Hello? I asked. No response. I wondered who the hell this guy was, and why no one went chasing after me. I didn't exactly want to walk back out of the room, considering what was waiting for me on the other side, so I decided to slowly walk towards the chair. The faces were staring at me, and the man gave off an incredibly sinister aura. I started noticeably shaking the closer I got to him. I made my way to the other side of the table, and I noticed that the man didn't have any facial features. It was just blank. No nose, no mouth, no eyes, and no ears. He was wearing a suit and tie, and had a large black cowboy hat on. At this point, I broke. I screamed at him. "What the hell do you want from me? I'll kill you. You hear me?" I collapsed onto the ground, crying. I was stuck in here. I decided to look around to see if there were any clues. I was able to turn on some lights. The faces lit up. I was right. They were clearly people's faces that were carved off at some point in time. None of them were decaying, though. Somehow this room kept them fresh. The light was only able to brighten the room to a sickening yellow hue. I searched in on one of the cabinets and was only able to find a variety of different knives and blades. I took a medium-sized folding knife and put it in my pocket. I then went into the bathroom. First, I was greeted by the sight of a body in the tub. His face was flayed off and was sitting neatly next to the sink. I initially thought he was dead, until blood spurted out of his mouth. "Kill me. Kill me. Kill me," he kept repeating. I decided I had to put him out of his misery. I grabbed the knife out of my pocket, flipped it open, and stabbed him in the throat. He choked for a second, and then went silent. I kept searching and searching the room, hoping to find anything that would assist me with my next move. The only other thing I found was a vial of green liquid beneath the sink. After about an hour of looking, I slunk defeated into the chair at the opposite side of the dinner table. Suddenly, the man came to life.
Hello there.
He uttered. I was startled. "Who are you?" I asked.
I am just a visitor.
He said. "Well, can you help me get out of here?" I thought back to the rules. They stated to not trust the man with no face. I could see why, with all the cut-up faces dangling above me.
I could help you, or I could add to my collection. Which one it will be up to you.
He talked in a very serious tone. I pondered for a moment in my chair. I didn't really have much of a choice but to trust him. I asked him what I had to do.
Well, as you can already tell, I like to collect things that I have without a face. Usually, I tempt you humans with a chance at freedom, and then I lure them into a trap. You humans really are very easy to trick. Their screams pleasure me, as I carve their faces off. But you already know my little game, so I would like to offer up another one. You win, and I will help you escape. If I win, I will be taking that face of yours.
My hand clenched the knife I had.
That thing won't do any good. Go ahead. Try and stab me if you want. It won't end well for you.
I thought a bit about his offer. Would he try to trick me again? I decided to just play his little game. Okay, I'm in, I stated.
Good, good. Well then, let's begin.
He pulled out a deck of all black playing cards and started shuffling them. A couple minutes went, and then he splayed the cards out in a row.
If you pick the correct card, you win. If you pick the incorrect card, then I win, and I will take that beautiful face of yours.
I had no idea what to do. All the cards were black. How would I know which one was correct? I thought maybe the room number had something to do with it. 117. But there clearly weren't 117 cards in the deck. Maybe 1 + 1 + 7. That'd be 9. But I didn't even know which direction I would start counting from. I sat there, contemplating what to do. I could try and stab him with the knife, but he said that wouldn't have been a good idea, and for some reason, I believed him. Well, will you just give me some kind of hint? I asked. He shook his head. I started to grow aggravated. I didn't have any clue which card to pick. Then, it hit me. I began desperately counting all the faces that were strung up. I got to 27. 2 + 7 is 9. Now I just had to figure out which side to start counting from. I wasn't 1,000% sure I was correct, but the man seemed very prideful about his collection, so it seemed logical. Then I thought of another idea. I brought the knife I was holding up and hurled it at him. He immediately brought his left hand up and caught it before it collided with his blank face. He had no reaction. He just slowly brought his hands down, still clutching the knife. Okay, I thought. I'm going to count 9 cards down from my right. I picked up the card and was about to tell him my decision was made when I remembered. The face in the bathroom. That makes 10. I put the card down and chose the next card from my right. This is my card. He quickly lunged across the table and held the knife to my throat.
You choose correctly.
He loosened his grip and took the card from my hand and placed it back into the deck, and then walked into the bathroom. He came back and was holding the vial of green liquid I had seen earlier.
First, you must drink this.
I hesitated. Could I really actually trust this guy? It was my only hope. I chugged it down. It tasted like nothing. I sure didn't feel any different.
The liquid will show you your spirit. You must follow it to find freedom.
Then, the faceless man ripped a huge hole straight out of thin air with his hands. Through the hole, I could see the woods that were right off of the trail that went around Harmony Hills.
Go through. Your spirit will guide you.
Wait, before I go, I need to get Alex, I yelled.
I can open the door whenever you request it, but only one time.
If I remembered Alex's room correctly, it was number 105. And if I was right, Alex would be in his room during free time. I grabbed another folding knife from the faceless man's cabinet and readied myself. "Open it to room 105, I asked.
As you wish.
He declared. I hopped through the portal and arrived in front of Alex's room. I barged in, probably looking like a madman, and just as suspected, Alex was lying down on his bed. "Alex, we have to go, now. I know a way out, but we have to leave right now." "But why would I ever want to leave?" he said, in a dazed state. I was afraid this would happen. I yanked him out of bed by his arm. He at least went semi-willingly. I opened the door a crack to see one man in white rounding the corner away from the patient's rooms. I guided Alex out and through the hall. I made it to the door that led outside when someone spotted me. "He's there. Get him," a man in white screamed. I madly dragged Alex outside while the men started dashing after me. I made it to the trail as one of the men in white was gaining on me. I whipped my knife out of my pocket. I flipped it open and let go of Alex's arm. The man tackled me by my legs, and I plunged the knife into his neck. Blood poured over my face. He didn't make a sound as he died. A couple more of the men in white were getting closer. I pulled Alex's arm, and we got to the trail. I wasn't sure exactly where to run off to. I knew there were creatures in the woods that killed all of the patients who entered. Just as my hopes started to dwindle, and as the men got close, I saw something glowing about 15 feet ahead of me. It was a snake, but it was shimmering with a green glowing aura. I knew I had to follow it. I ran off the trail and towards the snake, still dragging Alex behind me. I had to stop for a second because my foot was killing me. I saw that all the men in white were standing right at the border of the trail. Me and Alex were about 20 feet into the woods. "We'll find you," one of the men in white yelled to me. I turned back and followed the snake. It was going relatively fast, so it was tough to keep up with it, as I was also dragging Alex, and my foot hurt a great deal. Then, the snake stopped. I quickly took cover behind a tree with Alex. I could hear leaves and sticks cracking. I peeked around the tree and saw a strange creature. Its appearance looked like a child scribbling the outline of a human with a pencil. It was making odd clicking sounds as it bounded through the forest. It went on like this for hours. It would follow the snake as it made zigzags through the forest, and when the snake stopped, I would hide as best I could behind trees or boulders. Alex was slowing me down, but I knew that once he got some care, he would be back to normal, so I couldn't leave him. I kept following the snake until we reached a river. I pushed Alex to go through, but he just became limp and fell to the ground. "Alex, dude, please get up. We have to go." "Harmony Hills will make me a better mom. You'll see," he slurred out. Then I heard the clicking get closer. I didn't have time to grab Alex, so I bolted behind another tree. Christ, I thought. They're going to see him. I heard the branches snap right where Alex was, and then silence. Clicking continued. I heard clicking from multiple directions. Then 5 of them showed up. They started tearing Alex apart. He screamed, and then silence. I sprinted across the tree while they were distracted with Alex, and managed to find the snake again. This was all my fault. My friends died because of me. I started panicking, and then caught myself. I didn't have time for self-loathing. Hours of limping through those woods went by. It became dark. The only light I had was from the glow of the snake. There were no stars, and there was no moon. Eventually, we made it to a trail, and the snake disappeared. I started looking for it for a bit, until I heard that clicking sound again. I sprinted down the trail. The pain in my foot was immense, but I kept going and going, until I somehow fainted. I woke up in a hospital, with IVs in my arm, and my foot wrapped in bandages.
Oh, he's awake. Hello, my name is Claire, and I'm your nurse this morning. It seems you got yourself a nasty concussion, she exclaimed.
Where am I?
You're at a hospital, right outside of Redacted. You've been out for 2 days now. What is the last thing you remember?
I didn't know what to tell them. I fell off my bike. I could tell she didn't buy it. Obviously, that didn't explain what happened to my toes and why 2 were missing. But I didn't care.
Well, I'm sorry to inform you that your bike was not located. We found you on a popular hiking trail with no belongings on you. A hiker actually came across you on the side of the trail unresponsive, and he called 911. He may have saved your life. You had a nasty concussion, and your foot was bleeding profusely, she said.
I was sort of in a state of shock. I wasn't sure if this was some sick game, and I was still at Harmony Hills. But I did notice that I was starving. Could I please get some food?
Sure, no problem. How about a sandwich?
That sounds good. Thank you. She left the room, and my thoughts were racing. I didn't know whether to tell the people at the hospital about Harmony Hills or not. After a couple of minutes, Claire came back.
Here's your sandwich, and it looks like you've gotten a letter.
Okay. Thank you. She placed the food tray and letter on a table that folded up over the hospital bed. I looked at the letter. No return address. I opened it and unfolded the paper. "We will find you," was written in big, bold letters. I immediately ripped out my IVs and snuck out of the hospital. I have been on the run ever since. I never stay in a town or city for too long, and I use burner phones, as well as sleeping in random motels with a fake name, and I keep myself afloat by doing odd jobs. I also cut contact with my friends and my parents. I'm sure that they think I am dead. The one good thing that came from my experience is my newfound love for meditation. I do it every day, and I have been clean from drugs ever since I escaped. Now, I don't have all the answers as to what went on in Harmony Hills, but I know enough of its depravity. At first, I had only been trying to survive. But recently, I've been only interested in one thing: taking down that godforsaken place called Harmony Hills.